Mexico City sure has some resilient and undaunted parade goers. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. Today we're going to be continuing my 007 review series with the 24th James Bond film, 2015's Spectre. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all that extra content. Spectre stars Daniel Craig, Seydoux, and Christoph Waltz, and was directed by Mendes. It tells the story of James Bond, played by Daniel Craig, as he uncovers the evil Spectre organization and attempts to thwart their plan to take over the world. Spectre fills an unusual role in the Bond franchise. The previous 3 films in this rebooted Craig-era version of the series constituted a narrative trilogy of sorts. We're introduced to a novice 007 in Casino Royale and watch him transform into the effective agent that we expect James Bond to be over the course of the 3-film arc. So, despite many unanswered questions and unfinished plot threads from the reboot films, Skyfall felt like a proper conclusion to Bond's character arc. It was an ending to the trilogy, but also a beginning, with the final moments of the film acting as a bridge between this reboot franchise and a more traditional Bond franchise feeling. And then came Spectre, forced into that awkward space between new and old. It continues the storyline put forward by the 3 previous films, and this definitely works in some regards, because, like I mentioned, there were quite a few unfinished plot threads, especially from Quantum of Solace, that were never addressed in Skyfall. And this broader story was no doubt planned since the beginning of the Craig era, but because of the sense of story and character closure that Skyfall brought, Spectre ends up feeling like an afterthought, like a story that was tacked on after the fact to more closely link the previous films, and explain how everything was connected, while tying up some of the loose ends left by those previous movies. Now, this isn't exactly a bad thing, it's just a consequence of the narrative approach of the Craig era. Most previous Bond movies were essentially standalone films. Sometimes you'd see a secondary character pop up in more than one movie, and there was the rare reference to past events here and there, but for the most part, you could watch whichever movies you wanted, in whatever order you wanted, and it wouldn't matter, because it had no bearing on your understanding of the plot. That episodic approach changed when we hit the Craig era. Suddenly, we had multi-film story and character arcs, and so with Skyfall's ending feeling like a traditional Bond film's beginning, it put the franchise in a bit of a tough spot regarding which approach to take moving forward. Spectre begins like so many other Bond films. A series of white dots, and then the gun barrel opening. This may seem extraordinarily common, but this actually marks the first time a Craig-era Bond film has led with that trademark intro. It's a callback to the Bonds of the past, and sets the tone for what's to come. Although it shares its action sensibilities and unglamorized realism with its immediate predecessors, this film manages to set itself apart, not by doing anything new or unique, but rather by incorporating much of what had come before. There are gadget-laden cars equipped with ejector seats, entertaining, borderline campy sequences, plenty of goofy one-liners and quips, there's sarcasm directed at M, Q working his technological magic, bombastic action sequences, and even massive international conspiracies. But the most recycled element of all? This will no doubt surprise everybody. Spectre. The plot of this movie is a bit of a mixed bag. While narratively more cohesive than Quantum of Solace, it's nowhere near as strong as Casino Royale or Skyfall. As I mentioned before, it kind of feels almost unnecessarily tacked on, but at least it remains moderately compelling, because it's had this endgame build-up to it. It's got certain aspects that tie all 4 Craig-helmed films together, bringing to light some character connections that have only been previously hinted at, but there are also a few things that come completely out of left field here. What begins as a cryptic call to action quickly dives headlong into seemingly mundane politics, with the future of the 00 program hanging in the balance. And even though those moments do have purpose in the story, they're exceedingly slow-paced, making this film periodically dull. Between MI6 and Spectre, there are just way too many big committee meetings and organization structure discussions. This movie's actually got some really good action sequences, including the Mexico City Day of the Dead cold opener, which actually kicks the film off with a nice long single-take shot. So it's not that this film lacks exciting action, it just doesn't balance the pacing as well as it should have. Luckily, the committees and meetings are really all just an underlying subplot. In this rebooted storyline, we finally have our first villainous throwback, Blofeld. Yes, the longtime franchise antagonist and head of Spectre finally makes an appearance, along with a slightly different backstory than we've ever seen before. I have to say, the first time I saw this movie, I was a little underwhelmed by Blofeld. Christoph Waltz always makes a good villain, so it wasn't really a performance thing. I think it was more how the character was used, and the way he was incorporated into the story. Even though I'm still not particularly taken by him or his storyline on rewatch, I have softened a bit, and I'm definitely interested to see how it'll all carry over into No Time to Die and beyond. So there we have it, the current end to another Bond marathon. I can't say The Spectre is a particularly satisfying film, but it's not a bad one either, falling kinda in the middle of the franchise for me. It's tough to immediately follow a successful film, so this kind of fluctuation that we've seen in the Craig era is understandable. Despite finally revealing the criminal underpinnings of this rebooted Bond world, this movie doesn't wrap everything up nicely in the end, leaving plenty of possible avenues for the future of the franchise. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number one is what I'm going to call the tie-in, and has two components to it. The first component is how Spectre ties in with the rest of the Craig era. It definitely has a little bit of a tacked-on feel to it at times, like when all the past characters are shown during the title sequence, but there's no denying the satisfaction that comes from seeing several small pieces come together to form a nefarious and revelatory whole. The second component is how Spectre ties in with the Bonds of the past. This rebooted era has largely done its own thing with its own unique style, so it was really nice to see and feel that injection of classic Bond with this one, including the appearance of the franchise's most frequent villain and an organization we haven't heard from since 1971. The second pro is Madeleine Swann. This is the 24th Bond movie, so we've certainly seen our fair share of Bond girls at this point, but even so, we end up with a character unlike any we've seen before. She's incredibly reluctant to become involved in this story, and her past, along with the connections that come with it, not only reasonably explain her skill set, but also the unpredictable and tenuous relationships she has with different characters in this film. She's not the strongest Bond girl we've ever had, and isn't even one of my personal favorites, but she and the role she plays in the story are among the better parts of the film. On the con side, the biggest issue is the periodic dullness, and this largely comes down to two things: the story and the pacing. Far too much of this film's runtime is spent on internal politics and big meetings. We've got some of this coming from the subplot about defunding and shutting down the 00 program, and then we've got still more of it coming from the Spectre organization and its operation. Elements of both of these subplots are important to the grander scheme of the story, but they play out for far too long, and are jarringly slow compared to the action-heavy sequences that typically bookend them, which makes for some pretty uneven pacing. I'm gonna give Spectre 3 out of 5 paws. There are a number of things to like about this movie, but on the whole, it ends up feeling a little underwhelming, especially coming after Skyfall. I would recommend Spectre to certain Bond fans that fit into two distinct categories. If you're a big fan of the Craig era, then you're probably gonna like how this movie connects everything from the past 3 movies to reveal a larger scale threat. Some era fans, though, might feel like Skyfall was a logical conclusion, and that this movie unnecessarily drags things out rather than just starting fresh with a new villain idea. If you're a fan of classic Bond, especially the Connery era, I think you might really appreciate the slightly more traditional feeling route this movie takes, as well as the reintroduction of Spectre and Blofeld. If you liked Spectre, I would recommend the 23rd Bond film, Skyfall. Although it focuses more on Bond's past than a large-scale criminal organization, it's a fantastic wrap-up to the reboot's Bond character arc, and sets the stage for the more traditional feel of Spectre. If you like the Craig era and want another film that more expressly hints at the idea of a larger criminal network, you should check out the 22nd Bond movie, Quantum of Solace. It's got some choppy editing, and the villain is a little lackluster, but it's not bad as setup. And if you want to see a classic Blofeld and Spectre Bond movie, you might want to watch the 6th film in the series, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. In addition to Blofeld, this one also features an exclusive health clinic in a snowy setting. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Spectre? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, if the franchise continues this trend of rebooting past Bond villains, which classic villain would you like to see next? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insider information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button, and if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainely Movies, the way life should be.